Good afternoon. It's Mr. Cohen, and it is Monday, 4/27 at 3:47 p.m. Today, I'd like to come to you with a little discussion about some of the poems that you found in that packet, 13 Classic American Poems. I'd like to spend a little bit of time talking about four poems today: Sympathy by Paul Laurence Dunbar, and Caged Bird by Maya Angelou, and When Death Comes by Mary Oliver, and Conscientious Objector by Edna St. Vincent Millay. I want to just give you some ideas what you might do with these poems if you've chosen one of them to recite. If it's not one of these four that you've chosen, maybe you'll find something in this discussion that will interest you or help you recite the poem that you will choose, that you have chosen. The first poem I'd like to talk about, Sympathy by Paul Laurence Dunbar. Well, the first thing I like to do when I'm looking at a new poem is I like to determine whether it's got some beat to it, whether it uses rhyme, or whether it's free verse. I noticed this poem, I'm just going to write out line numbers for the first stanza: 1, 2, 3. I noticed that there are 3 7-line stanzas. And I'm looking at the end of the lines here, looking for a rhyme scheme. Let's see, I'm going to write A here for lass, and B for slopes, and A for grass, and A for glass, and slopes, opes, B, C, and C. So it does have a certain rhyme scheme. Let's see if it's got a beat to it. Just going to start reading and trying to see if I can find some meter, some beat to it. I know what the caged bird feels, alas. I know what the caged bird feels, alas. I don't really find it. I can't say it in iambic. I can't say, I know what the caged bird feels, alas. That doesn't work that way. Let me just keep going and see if I can find a beat in this poem. When the sun is bright on the upland slopes. That seems like it's got some kind of beat to it. When the sun is bright on the upland slopes. Do you hear it? It goes ba-da-ba-da-ba, ba-da-ba-da-ba, ba-da-da-da-da, ba-da-ba-da-ba. Let's see if I find it in the third line. When the wind stirs soft through the springing grass, ba-da-ba-da-da, ba-da-ba-da-da. It's close. One thing I am noticing is in the first line, do you hear it? You have these 3 strong syllables right next to each other. I know what the caged bird feels. You really want to slow down when you have this coincidence of strong syllables next to each other. We also see it here. Wind stirs soft. So the second line is when the sun is bright on the upland slopes. Ba-da-ba-da-ba, ba-da-ba-da-ba. Third line, it's a little bit different. When the wind stirs soft through the springing grass, and the river flows like a stream of glass. Line 4 has the same kind of motion as line 2. Line 2, when the sun is bright on the upland slopes, and line 4, when the river flows like a stream of glass. We find these 3 big syllables together again in line 5. First bird sings, first bud opes. But there is a basic beat, and I'm going to have to mention another foot. We've talked about feet in meter before. Most of Shakespeare is written in iambic pentameter. There are variations, though, like sometimes he'll replace an iamb with a trochee. Do you remember what that looked like? An iamb was da da, iamb, and a trochee went da da. We found when the witches were singing their song, double, double, toil and trouble, it went ba da, That was called a trochee. There's also a spondy, which is two strong beats in a row. Here we want to talk about a triplet beat. It's got three syllables. It goes ba-da-ba. You hear it in a song like this. 'Twas the night before Christmas when all through the house. It goes weak, weak, strong. And that's called an anapest. You can see how this line works. Look at line 2. It goes, when the sun, weak, weak, strong. When the sun, and then we have in the second foot an ion. When the sun is bright. And then we're back to, in the third foot, we're back to an anapest on the upland slopes. And so it has this very nice musical sound, this line. When the sun is bright on the upland slopes. There's a shift in lines 3 and 5. When the wind stirs soft through the springing grass, and the river flows like a stream of glass. And so you find this beat, this meter throughout the poem. I kind of like to talk about what the poem is saying, what the poem means a little bit. It seems like you have a speaker who talks about his sympathy with a caged bird. We see the speaker mention himself in the first and last line of each, the first and last line of each of these stanzas. And he's basically saying, I know what it's like. I know what the caged bird feels. The world, the earth, the spring is so beautiful. When the first bird sings, it's so beautiful, but the caged bird can't participate. And the speaker in this poem says, I know what that's like to be in a situation where you cannot embrace your fellows and live life to the fullest. The writer lived a very short life. You can see it there, 28 plus 6, died at 34. And if you look him up, if you Google him, Paul Laurence Dunbar, beautiful, elegant, brilliant man, African American living in America, 120 years ago, lived during a very rough, ugly time to be an African American in America. And this poem might express his frustration at being blocked. So this is a beautiful poem, and if you can get the beat, you can really make this poem shine. When the sun is bright on the upland slopes, when the wind stirs soft through the springing grass, and the river flows like a stream of glass, when the first bird sings and the first bud opes, and the faint perfume from its chalice steals, I know what the caged bird feels. I know what it's like to suffer. If you understand it, you'll be able to say it with a little more authenticity, genuineness, sense of purpose. I'd like to just, whenever I can, to point out a cool word like this word chalice. We saw that word in Macbeth. I don't know if you remember that. It was in this long speech. I'm just going to bring something over here for a second. It was in this long speech that Macbeth gives in Act 1, Scene 7, where he's debating to kill King Duncan or not. And he uses the word chalice. Let's see if I can find it. Starting here on line 10. This even-handed justice commends the ingredients of our poisoned chalice to our own lips. Like we put poison in a chalice. It's a fancy kind of cup, usually gold or silver. We put poison in a chalice to serve somebody else, and we end up drinking poison ourselves as a kind of justice. And here, the word chalice, it has a little pronoun here. What is the antecedent or referent of this pronoun? when the first bird sings and the first bud opes, the first flower opens, and the faint perfume from its chalice, from the cup of the first bud opening in springtime, there's a perfume that comes out of the cup of the first bud, and it steals, it kind of moves forward without being seen. This faint perfume from the first bud. So that's a beautiful poem. I am working on memorizing this one. The next poem is obviously inspired by Sympathy by Paul Laurence Dunbar. That's Caged Bird by Maya Angelou. And she talks about a caged bird. She wrote a very important memoir called I Know Why the Caged Bird Sings, which is basically takes from the last line of this poem, I know why the caged bird sings. And in this poem, she kind of creates an antithesis, juxtaposition between two birds, the free bird and the caged bird. And this one is very song-like. It goes, it's got a certain beat to it. It seems like it's in two. This one here, sorry to keep going back and forth like this. This one seems to be in four, right? So it goes, when the sun is bright on the upland slopes, ba-da-ba-da-ba, 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 four, right? But this one, Caged Bird, seems to be in two. Can you hear it? The free bird leaps on the back of the wind and floats downstream till the current ends. And the beats are not in any specific place in the line, it's just two beats in a line. And the second beat seems to be stronger than the first. So it goes, a free bird leaps on the back of the wind and floats downstream till the current ends and dips his wing in the orange sun rays and dares. Something happens in this last line here. It seems to have three here, and dares to claim the sky. So it goes, a free bird leaps on the back of the wind and floats downstream to the current ends and dips his wing in the orange sun rays and dares to claim the sky. Really changes there at the end. The next one has the same form. Do you notice? It goes, this is interesting too. Seven. We get seven, just like Sympathy, which has seven. But a bird that stalks, it goes two, right? But a bird that stalks down his narrow cage can seldom see through his bars of rage. His wings are clipped and his feet are tied, so he 1, 2, 3. There's a very kind of clever conceit in this poem. It seems like the free bird, he's got life made. What does he do? He leaps on the back of the wind and floats downstream. He dips his wing in the orange sun rays. He doesn't need to sing. Whereas a bird that's caged, it's really the only way that he can express himself. There's some kind of interesting thought about the origins of art and poetry, it seems, in this poem. That art, poetry, music comes from some sense of being caged, being trapped, suffering in some way. I'd just like to go down a little bit. There are different stanzas of different meters, like what happens down here in the 1, 2, 3, 4th stanza. It goes, but the free bird thinks of another breeze. We've shifted into four here, 4 beats. And the trade winds soft through the sighing trees. That seems like it's got these 3 syllables again. Trade winds soft. Just like in the other poem, Caged Bird feels, and the trade winds soft through the sighing trees, and the fat worms waiting on the dawn bright lawn, and he names the sky his own. We got 3 here. And then do we have the same shape in the next stanza? But a caged bird stands on the grave of dreams. His shadow shouts on a nightmare scream. His wings are clipped and his feet are tied. So he opens his throat to sing. Right? That's 3 as well. This one really wants you to press down on those beats, right? You can turn it into something highly rhythmic. Really fun poem to say. Caged Bird by Maya Angelou. Next, I'd like to talk about, actually, I'm going to talk about this one first. This is Conscientious Objector by Edna St. Vincent Millay. And this one is so obviously free verse, right? It doesn't have a beat. It's not in 2, it's not in 3, it's not in 4. Some of these lines are so long. Do you notice that? There's no rhyme. Death doesn't rhyme with floor. Morning, girth, up, fran, swamp, roll. No rhyme at all. And there's not a regular beat to it. So, in some ways, this poem is harder to say and harder to memorize. I mean, if you can memorize one of these poems very quickly, just know where the beats are and hang stuff on the beat. This one, you have to kind of play with it and see what other things you find. And you might find in a poem like this things like assonance, consonance, alliteration, and also repetition. There's something else that's going to make the poem hang together. When you don't use meter, a poet will often use repetition. We're going to see that in this poem. Well, first, I would just try to say it aloud a few times. I shall die, but that is all that I shall do for death. I shall die. I feel like that word is so big that I might make these kind of a little bit smaller, right? I shall die. Or you could do, I shall die. I'm not sure what to do with it, but I like experimenting with it. The next part, but that is all that I shall do for death. I notice there's some alliteration here, do and death. That is all that I shall do for death. But that is all that I shall do for death. This word in the middle here seems important, but that is all that I shall do for death. Death is going to be personified here, and death is going to be a horseman, which is a very common image in the history of literature. I'm finding out as I read more and more. A horseman, right? Death is, the speaker says, I hear him leading his horse out of the stall. Noticing sound connections. There's no beat, but there's sound connections like stall. That connects with all, right? I hear him leading his horse out of the stall. And like him and horse, if you kind of are sensitive to these things, you can say it in a way that feels organic and feels connected and artistic. I hear him leading his horse out of the stall. I hear. So we're getting a repetition here. I hear and I hear. No beat, no rhyme, but like a kind of pattern of rhetoric, a parallel between phrases or clauses. I hear him leading his horse out of the stall. I hear the clatter on the barn floor all. I hear the clatter on the barn floor. He is in haste. He has business in Cuba, business in the Balkans, many calls to make this morning. We have this all again, calls, stall. We get lots of B's here too. He has business in Cuba, business in the Balkans, many calls to make this morning, and make and morning. Many calls to make this morning. If you can connect them, it sounds so nice. But I will not hold the bridle while he clinches the girth. I'm not going to help him at all. I'm not going to hold the bridle. These are really horsey metaphors. The bridle, the thing that you put around a horse's head that holds the reins. I'm not going to hold on to that while death clinches the girth. That's the piece that goes around the belly of the horse. And he may mount by himself. I will not give him a leg up. I'm not going to help him get up onto his horse. The title here is really important. Conscientious Objector is a person who says, no, I will not go and fight in your war, mostly because I am against killing. And so the speaker in this poem respects and understands the fact they're going to die, but is not going to help death, is not going to kill. And it just keeps going on. It's really just one message that's repeated a number of different ways. Though he flick my shoulders with his whip. And we have some assonance. You remember what that is? It's a repetition of vowel sounds, flick and whip, right? Though he flick my shoulders with his whip. I will not tell him which way the fox ran. With his hoof on my breast, I will not tell him. We get this again. I will not tell him. I will not tell him. I will not tell him where the black boy hides in the swamp. I shall die, but that is all that I shall do for death. I am not on his payroll. This is nice. All these stanzas are different length, 1, 4, 3, 5. But you notice that, like in stanza 2 here, I guess you'd call it, the last little bit is just like this strong, short sentence piece clause. I will not give him a leg up. I am not on his payroll. It's just like at the end, there's a real kind of strong certainty, strong sentiment. And the poem goes on. There's a nice rhetorical question near the end. Am I a spy in the land of the living that I should deliver men to death? Right? Am I a spy? And we get lots of nice stuff here. I and spy and land of the living, deliver men to death. And it's like it keeps going. Brother, the password and the plans of our city are safe with me. So this is a very strong and very kind of bold and human poem. I really like this one. I'm learning this one as well. Conscientious Objector. And finally, When Death Comes by Mary Oliver, more personification of death. And more repetition. Here we have, she's doing it all over the place. You notice, like, when death comes, 1. And then here, 2. When death comes, and 4, when death comes. I was asking my wife, Christina, who's a violinist, what do you do when you see a phrase repeated exactly a number of times? She says, every time you got to sing it somewhat differently. And I'd recommend that. I think that makes sense if you're reciting this poem. When death comes like the hungry bear in autumn, when death comes and takes all the bright coins from his purse. Now, you notice this one, like Conscientious Objector, doesn't have regular number of lines in a stanza. The first one's got 3, and the second one's got 3, and then 2, and then 2, and then 4, and then 2, and then 2, and then 2, and then 3, and then 4, and then 1. It's not. There's no logic to that. But we do always have questions like, what do you do here? Do you take a pause there? Or do you just run it on? Is this an enjambed line? When death comes and takes all the bright coins from his purse to buy me and snaps the purse shut. Or do you go, bright coins from his purse to buy me? It's totally up to you. There's not a rule. Maybe somebody says there is, but there isn't. You do what you find best. This feels also like it wants to be divided up into sections. When death comes, this is when this future event comes to pass. We get that 4 times. And then this is what I want to happen when this event in the future comes to pass. When this thing happens, I want to look like this. I want this kind of thing to happen. And so the first is like when future comes to be. And the second piece that starts right here is uh, here's the way I want it to be. That's like part, this is like section A, and this is section B. And then it seems like we have another section. In order to get to the place where I can die well with class, with a kind of openness, here's how I live in the present. And that seems to go through this section here. And then finally, you have now we're back to um, when it's over. I want to say, all my life I was a bride married to amazement. That's kind of like this is like this seems like another section B there. And so if you can sectionalize it to help you kind of make sense of the motion of the thought, it will help you. There's so much interesting repetition. It's not only up the top when death comes 4 times. We also have um, therefore I look upon, and then we get it right again. And then we have something kind of close, I consider, and I think of, and then I think of each name. I'm just going to put different marks here. I think of each life, and then each name, and then each body. And then we have when it's over, and then we have when it's over, and here we have I want to say, and here it's I don't want to. And there's some nice sound stuff going on in this one too, like just some lines that I really like. Um, all my life, I was a bride married to amazement. There's some good M's here. Um, also, um, uh, also this line here. I don't want to find myself sighing and frightened. Um, so this is a beautiful poem, and really, what is she saying in this poem? It's something so big and generous that when death comes, I want to be able to enter death in such a way that I'm not clinging to life, I'm not arguing, that I can walk through the door full of curiosity, wondering. I would like to die in that way, and therefore I'm trying to live this kind of life right now. Socrates, the Greek philosopher, he saw philosophy as practicing death. It sounds kind of gloomy, doesn't it? But in some ways, it is one of the essential responsibilities and duties of life to prepare yourself for death. And the way to do that is to live life to the fullest, so you're not clinging and not crying out more. I need more life. I don't want to go. It's so terrible. Mary Oliver is famous among uh, students of Buddhism. So those are 4 poems I wanted to talk to you about today. Today we read in reverse order, When Death Comes, Conscientious Objector, Caged Bird, and Sympathy. These are all great poems, and I really look forward to hearing which poem you've worked on. I'm going to do another couple videos with more poems in the next few days. Have a great day. Thanks so much, and take care of yourself.